The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as King William prepared for what he believed would be a routine day of royal duties. The weight of the crown had settled heavily on his shoulders since his coronation, and the constant pressures of modern monarchy had begun to show in the tired lines around his eyes. He stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the changing of the guard ceremony below, unaware that this particular Tuesday would alter the course of British royal history forever. Camilla had been growing increasingly frustrated with the new king's decisions over recent months. What had started as minor disagreements about palace protocol had escalated into heated arguments behind closed doors. She felt her position as queen consort was being undermined at every turn, and her influence within the royal household was diminishing rapidly. The tension between them had become so palpable that even the most loyal palace staff had begun to whisper about the growing rift. The breaking point came during a private meeting in the blue drawing room, where William had just informed Camilla of his decision to restructure the royal household's hierarchy. Her face flushed with anger as she realized her ceremonial duties were being significantly reduced, and several of her longtime advisors were being reassigned to other positions within the palace. The king explained his reasoning calmly, citing the need for modernization and efficiency, but Camilla saw it as a deliberate attempt to sideline her completely. Their voices echoed through the ornate room as the argument intensified, with Camilla accusing William of disrespecting her years of service to the crown and her late husband's memory. She stood abruptly from her chair, her hands trembling with rage, while William remained seated trying to maintain his composure despite the growing hostility in the room. The ancient paintings on the walls seemed to look down disapprovingly at the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. What happened next would be debated in courtrooms and tabloids for years to come. According to witnesses, Camilla's anger reached a crescendo when William mentioned that her public appearances would be limited to ceremonial functions only. She allegedly lunged forward, striking the king across the face with enough force to leave a visible mark. The sound of the impact echoed through the silent room like a thunderclap, followed by a moment of stunned silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Palace security, trained to protect the monarch from any threat, responded immediately to the commotion. Within seconds, 2 members of the royal guard burst through the heavy oak doors, their faces stern and professional despite the shocking scene before them. They had witnessed many unusual situations during their service, but nothing had prepared them for the sight of the queen consort standing over the king with her hand still raised, her chest heaving with anger and her eyes blazing with fury. The king slowly raised his hand to his cheek, feeling the sting of the blow while processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The red mark on his face would fade within hours, but the implications of this moment would reverberate through the monarchy for generations. He looked at Camilla with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the woman who had been part of his family for so many years with the person who had just committed an unthinkable act against the crown. In that frozen moment, as the guards awaited orders and Camilla stood defiant, the very foundations of royal protocol trembled. The ancient traditions that had governed the British monarchy for centuries had never anticipated such a scenario, leaving everyone in the room uncertain about what should happen next. The only sound was the ticking of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece, marking the seconds as history held its breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented crisis would unfold. The silence in the blue drawing room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Captain James Morrison, the senior guard who had first entered the room, found himself in an impossible position. His training had prepared him to protect the monarch from external threats, but never from a member of the royal family itself. He stood frozen, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio while his eyes darted between the king and Camilla, waiting for some sign of what action to take. King William slowly lowered his hand from his reddened cheek, his mind racing through the constitutional implications of what had just transpired. As the sovereign, he held ultimate authority over the royal household, but the personal relationship with Camilla complicated everything. She had been more than just his stepmother. She had been a stabilizing presence during some of the most turbulent years of his life. Now, looking at her defiant stance and the fire still burning in her eyes, he felt the weight of his crown more heavily than ever before. Camilla seemed to realize the gravity of her actions only when she saw the guards' hands moving toward their radios. The anger that had consumed her moments before began to give way to a cold understanding of what she had done. Striking the monarch was not merely a personal assault. It was an attack on the very institution of the British crown. The legal ramifications alone could destroy everything she had worked to build during her years of service to the royal family. The captain cleared his throat softly, breaking the oppressive silence. His voice was respectful but firm as he addressed the king, asking for clear instructions on how to proceed. The other guard remained by the door, his eyes scanning the room for any additional threats while maintaining the professional demeanor that had been drilled into him through years of service. Both men understood they were witnessing a moment that would likely be analyzed and discussed for decades to come. William stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. He walked to the window, looking out at the tourists gathered outside the palace gates, completely unaware of the drama unfolding within these ancient walls. The irony was not lost on him that thousands of people came to the palace daily to catch a glimpse of royal life, yet none would ever witness a scene like this. He turned back to face Camilla, his expression unreadable but his voice steady when he finally spoke. The king's words were chosen carefully, each syllable weighted with the authority of his position. He told Captain Morrison that the situation needed to be handled with the utmost discretion, but that protocol must be followed regardless of personal relationships. The law was clear about assaults on the sovereign, and even family members were not above it. As he spoke, Camilla's face grew pale, the reality of her situation finally sinking in completely. Captain Morrison nodded grimly and reached for his radio, speaking in coded language that would alert palace security without causing panic among the staff. Within minutes, additional guards would arrive, along with senior palace officials who would need to manage what was rapidly becoming a constitutional crisis. The machinery of royal protocol, unchanged for centuries, began to move with its ancient, inexorable momentum. Camilla finally broke her silence, her voice trembling as she attempted to explain her actions. She spoke of months of frustration, of feeling pushed aside and forgotten despite her years of dedication to the crown. Her words tumbled out in a rush, a mixture of justification and plea for understanding. But as she spoke, she could see in William's eyes that the damage had already been done. The bridge between them, built over years of shared experiences and mutual respect, had been burned in a single moment of uncontrolled rage. The heavy doors opened again as more personnel entered the room, their faces professional masks hiding their shock at the unprecedented situation. Among them was the palace's chief of security, a woman whose 20-year career had never prepared her for anything remotely similar to this scenario. She took in the scene with sharp eyes, immediately understanding the delicate balance between maintaining royal dignity and upholding the law that would need to be struck in the coming hours. Chief Security Officer Sarah Bennett had served the royal family through numerous scandals and crises, but nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for this moment. As she entered the blue drawing room, her trained eyes immediately assessed the situation, taking note of the king's marked cheek, Camilla's defensive posture, and the tension radiating from every person present. She understood immediately that this was not just a family dispute but a potential, constitutional emergency that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The weight of decision fell heavily on Bennett's shoulders as she considered her options. Royal protocol demanded that any assault on the sovereign be treated with the utmost seriousness, regardless of the perpetrator's status or relationship to the crown. However, the practical implications of arresting the queen consort were staggering. The media frenzy alone could damage the monarchy's reputation irreparably, and the legal proceedings would expose private royal family matters to unprecedented public scrutiny. Bennett approached the king with the deference required by protocol while maintaining the professional demeanor necessary for such a grave situation. She requested a private word with His Majesty, leading him to a corner of the ornate room where they could speak in hushed tones. Her voice was steady as she outlined the legal requirements and constitutional obligations that bound them all, even in circumstances as extraordinary as these. The law made no exceptions for family relationships when it came to assaults on the crown. Meanwhile, Camilla stood in the center of the room, surrounded by guards who maintained a respectful distance while ensuring she could not leave. The reality of her situation became increasingly clear with each passing moment. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the consequences would extend far beyond her own fate. The scandal would engulf the entire royal family, potentially undermining public confidence in an institution that had weathered centuries of challenges and controversies. King William listened to Bennet's quiet briefing, his face growing more serious as she explained the full scope of the legal implications. Under British law, any physical assault on the monarch constituted treason, a charge that carried severe penalties regardless of the circumstances. Even if he personally chose to forgive Camilla, the legal system would likely proceed with prosecution once the incident became known. The Crown's authority depended on the consistent application of law, even when it was personally painful. The king returned to face Camilla, his expression heavy with the burden of his decision. He spoke her name softly, and for a moment, the years of shared history seemed to hang between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. But duty to the crown and the law ultimately superseded personal relationships, no matter how deep or complicated. With visible reluctance, he gave Bennet the authorization to proceed with the arrest, his voice barely above a whisper as he spoke the words that would change everything. Bennet nodded solemnly and approached Camilla with the formal bearing required by such a momentous occasion. The words of arrest, spoken in the ancient language of legal protocol, seemed to echo through the centuries of royal history contained within those walls. As she began to recite the formal charges, Camilla's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as the full magnitude of her actions became undeniably real. The other guards moved with practiced precision, though their usual efficiency was tempered by the unprecedented nature of their task. Never before had they been required to arrest a member of the royal family, let alone the queen consort herself. Their movements were careful and respectful, understanding that every gesture would likely be scrutinized by historians and legal experts for generations to come. As the arrest proceeded, Bennet was acutely aware that news of this incident would eventually leak to the press. Despite their best efforts at containment, the palace's usual strategies for managing royal scandals would be utterly inadequate for something of this magnitude. She made quick mental notes about immediate damage control measures, knowing that the next few hours would be crucial in determining how this crisis would ultimately affect the monarchy's future. The ancient clock on the mantelpiece continued its steady ticking, marking time as one of the most shocking moments in modern royal history unfolded. Outside the windows, London continued its daily rhythm, completely unaware that inside Buckingham Palace, the very fabric of the constitutional monarchy was being tested in ways that no one had ever imagined possible. The formal arrest procedures unfolded with surreal precision in the gilded confines of the blue drawing room. Chief Bennet's voice remained steady as she continued reading Camilla's rights, though the absurdity of informing the queen consort that she had the right to remain silent was not lost on anyone present. The ancient protocols of British law enforcement clashed dramatically with the ornate surroundings and the unprecedented nature of the situation, creating a scene that seemed torn from the pages of a constitutional nightmare. Camilla's tears had stopped, replaced by a steely resolve that surprised even those who knew her well. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at King William, her voice clear despite the tremor of emotion underneath. She asked for permission to contact her personal attorney, a request that Bennet immediately approved, understanding that proper legal representation would be crucial for maintaining the integrity of any subsequent proceedings. The complexity of prosecuting a member of the royal family would require the highest standards of legal procedure. King William watched the proceedings with a mixture of sorrow and grim determination. The personal cost of his decision was evident in the way his shoulders sagged, aging him visibly in the span of minutes. However, his resolve remained firm as he understood that the monarchy's credibility depended on demonstrating that no one, regardless of their position or relationship to the crown, was above the law. This principle had been tested before in British history, but never quite so dramatically or personally. The palace's communication team was already working frantically in adjacent rooms, crafting carefully worded statements that would need to be released once news of the arrest inevitably leaked to the press. They faced an impossible task. How to explain the arrest of the queen consort without completely undermining public confidence in the royal family. Every word would be scrutinized by media outlets, constitutional scholars, and the general public, all seeking to understand how such an unprecedented situation had come to pass. As Bennet prepared to escort Camilla from the room, the queen consort made one final attempt to reach out to William. Her voice carried decades of shared history as she reminded him of her years of faithful service to the crown and her genuine love for the royal family. She spoke of the loneliness and frustration that had driven her to this desperate moment, pleading for understanding even as she accepted responsibility for her actions. Her words hung in the air like a challenge to the harsh realities of royal duty. The king's response was measured but firm, acknowledging their shared history while emphasizing that personal feelings could not override constitutional law. He spoke of the difficult balance between family loyalty and duty to the nation, a struggle that had defined royal life for centuries. His words carried the weight of kingship, even as his eyes betrayed the personal anguish of a man forced to choose between love and law. Bennett gently but firmly began to guide Camilla toward the door, the small procession moving through corridors that had witnessed centuries of royal drama, but nothing quite like this. Palace staff who encountered the group quickly averted their eyes and stepped aside, their training kicking in despite their shock at the unprecedented scene. Word would spread quickly through the servants' quarters, making the challenge of containing news of the arrest even more difficult. The journey through the palace took on an almost ceremonial quality, each step marking the transition from family dispute to constitutional crisis. The portraits of past monarchs seemed to watch disapprovingly as the current queen consort was led away under arrest, their painted eyes bearing witness to a scene that would have been unimaginable during their own reigns. The very walls of Buckingham Palace appeared to absorb the shock of this historic moment. As they approached the palace's security office, where Camilla would be held pending formal charging procedures, Bennett's radio crackled with urgent messages from various departments. The palace's legal team was assembling for emergency consultations, while security personnel worked to ensure that no unauthorized photographs or videos of the arrest could be taken. The machinery of royal crisis management was shifting into high gear. Though no existing playbook could adequately address a situation of this magnitude, the heavy oak door of the security office closed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo through the centuries of royal tradition. For the first time in British history, a queen consort sat in a holding cell within Buckingham Palace itself. The irony of her situation as sharp as the legal predicament she now faced. The crown jewels rested safely in the Tower of London, but the crown itself had been struck a blow that would resonate far beyond the palace walls. Within the secure confines of the palace holding area, Camilla sat on a simple wooden chair, a stark contrast to the throne she had occupied during state ceremonies. The room was spartanly furnished but maintained the dignity appropriate for detaining a member of the royal family, though such accommodations had never been designed with this scenario in mind. Her personal attorney, Sir Marcus Whitfield, arrived within the hour, his usually composed demeanor shaken by the extraordinary circumstances of his summons to Buckingham Palace. Sir Marcus had represented the royal family in various legal matters for over 2 decades, but nothing in his extensive experience had prepared him for defending the queen consort against charges of assaulting the sovereign. As he reviewed the preliminary evidence with Camilla, the legal complexities became immediately apparent. The case would involve unprecedented constitutional questions about the relationship between personal family disputes and crimes against the crown, issues that had never been tested in modern British courts. Meanwhile, King William found himself in emergency session with his most trusted advisors in the palace's secure conference room. The Attorney General had been summoned urgently from London, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury and senior government officials who would need to navigate the constitutional implications of prosecuting a sitting queen consort. The discussions were heated but respectful, as everyone grappled with legal precedents that simply did not exist for such circumstances. The palace's media strategy team worked frantically to prepare for the inevitable leak of information about Camilla's arrest. They knew that any attempt to completely suppress the story would ultimately backfire, but they needed time to craft a narrative that would preserve some measure of dignity for the royal family, while acknowledging the serious nature of the charges. Public relations experts with decades of experience managing royal crises found themselves in uncharted territory. Outside the palace walls, life in London continued normally, with tourists still gathering to watch the changing of the guard and take photographs of the iconic building. None of them could have imagined that inside those historic walls, one of the most dramatic constitutional crises in British history was unfolding. The contrast between the public face of royal tradition and the private reality of family conflict had never been more stark or consequential. Sir Marcus emerged from his consultation with Camilla to meet with the Crown Prosecution Service representatives who had been hastily assembled to handle the case. The legal discussions that followed were unlike anything in British jurisprudence, as lawyers attempted to apply centuries-old laws about treason and assault to a situation that defied traditional categorization. The very definition of what constituted an attack on the Crown was being debated in real time by some of the nation's most distinguished legal minds. The international implications of the crisis were already becoming apparent as foreign ambassadors began making discreet inquiries about the stability of the British monarchy. News of internal royal family conflicts could affect diplomatic relationships and international confidence in the United Kingdom's political stability. The palace's international relations team found themselves managing unprecedented questions about constitutional continuity and royal succession procedures. As evening approached, the decision was made to transfer Camilla to a more appropriate facility for formal processing and charging. The logistics of moving a queen consort through London's streets while maintaining both security and dignity required careful coordination between multiple agencies. Special arrangements were made to avoid media attention, though palace officials knew that complete secrecy would be impossible to maintain much longer. The transfer itself became a surreal procession through the heart of London, with unmarked vehicles carrying one of the most recognizable women in the world to face charges that challenged the very foundations of royal authority. Police motorcycles provided discreet escort, while palace security ensured that no unauthorized photographs could be taken of this historic journey. The irony of the queen consort being transported like a common criminal was not lost on anyone involved in the operation. At the magistrate's court, special security arrangements had been made to process Camilla's case with appropriate dignity while maintaining the integrity of legal procedures. The building, which had seen countless cases over the years, had never witnessed anything approaching the constitutional significance of this particular defendant. Court officials worked overtime to ensure that proper protocols were followed while adapting to circumstances that no manual or training program had ever addressed. The formal charging process proceeded with meticulous attention to legal detail, as everyone involved understood that every aspect of the case would be scrutinized by legal scholars and constitutional experts for generations to come. The charges read against Camilla carried the weight of centuries of British law, even as they were applied to a situation that seemed to belong more in a work of historical fiction than in the modern world. The news of Camilla's arrest broke to the world at precisely 11:47 in the evening, when a court clerk accidentally included her name on a public docket listing. Within minutes, the story exploded across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide, sending shockwaves through the international community and triggering the largest media frenzy in royal history. Buckingham Palace's carefully laid plans for controlling the narrative collapsed as reporters scrambled to verify the incredible story that the Queen Consort had been arrested for attacking King William. Television news anchors struggled to maintain their professional composure as they reported details that seemed too extraordinary to be true. International news networks interrupted regular programming to cover the developing story, while constitutional experts were hastily assembled to provide context for an event that had no historical precedent. The British pound fell sharply in overnight, trading as financial markets reacted to the unprecedented constitutional crisis threatening the stability of one of the world's oldest monarchies. Inside Buckingham Palace, emergency meetings continued through the night as royal officials grappled with damage control on an unprecedented scale. The palace's usual strategy of dignified silence seemed woefully inadequate for a crisis of this magnitude, yet any public statement risked further inflaming an already explosive situation. King William, exhausted by the day's events, found himself facing decisions that would define his reign and potentially determine the future of the British monarchy itself. Public reaction to the news was swift and polarized, with social media platforms becoming battlegrounds for fierce debates about royal privilege, domestic violence, and the relevance of monarchy in modern society. Supporters of Camilla argued that family disputes should remain private matters, while others demanded that she face the full consequences of her actions, regardless of her royal status. The hashtag royal arrest began trending worldwide within hours, accompanied by countless memes, conspiracy theories, and heated political commentary. At the secure facility where Camilla was being held, she spent her first night in custody reflecting on the catastrophic turn her life had taken in less than 24 hours. Her legal team worked frantically to prepare a defense strategy for charges that carried severe penalties under British law, while also attempting to negotiate bail terms appropriate for someone of her unique status. The question of whether a queen consort could be released on bail had never been tested in court, adding another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented case. Sir Marcus Whitfield found himself at the center of the most high-profile legal case in modern British history, fielding calls from journalists, constitutional scholars, and legal experts from around the world. His strategy sessions with Camilla focused not only on her legal defense, but also on the broader implications for the monarchy and the British constitutional system. Every decision they made would set precedents for future cases, involving the royal family, and could influence how the crown itself was perceived by future generations. The international diplomatic community watched the crisis unfold with a mixture of fascination and concern, as the stability of the British government and its international relationships appeared threatened by internal royal family conflicts. Foreign ministers from allied nations began making discreet inquiries about the constitutional implications of the crisis, while Republican movements in Commonwealth countries seized upon the scandal as evidence that monarchy had outlived its usefulness in the modern world. William's advisors presented him with a range of options for addressing the crisis, from pursuing a complete legal prosecution to attempting some form of negotiated resolution that might preserve royal dignity while acknowledging the seriousness of the charges. Each option carried enormous risks, both for the immediate future of his reign and for the long-term stability of the British constitutional monarchy. The decisions he made in the coming days would echo through history and potentially reshape the relationship between the crown and the British people. As dawn broke over London, protesters began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, holding signs demanding justice and accountability from the royal family. The contrast between their angry chants and the dignified silence of the palace guards created a powerful image that was broadcast around the world, symbolizing the tension between traditional royal authority and modern democratic values. Police barriers were erected to keep the growing crowds at a safe distance while allowing for peaceful demonstration. The legal proceedings scheduled for the following day promised to be unlike anything in British judicial history, as the courts prepared to adjudicate charges against a sitting queen consort for the first time ever. Legal scholars worked through the night to research precedents from centuries past, while court officials made unprecedented security arrangements for what promised to be the most scrutinized legal proceeding in modern British history. The palace communications team, working under enormous pressure, finally released a brief statement acknowledging the serious legal matter involving a member of the royal family and requesting privacy and respect for legal processes. The carefully worded statement satisfied no one, and only fueled further speculation about the true extent of the crisis facing the monarchy. As the sun rose on what would become known as the darkest day in modern royal history, the full consequences of that fateful moment in the blue drawing room were only beginning to unfold. The morning of Camilla's first court appearance dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over the nation. Outside Westminster Magistrates' Court, hundreds of reporters from around the world jostled for position behind police barriers, their cameras and microphones ready to capture every moment of this historic legal proceeding. The scene resembled a carnival of chaos, with royal supporters, protesters, and curious onlookers creating a cacophony of voices that could be heard for blocks in every direction. Inside the courthouse, extraordinary security measures were in place to protect both Camilla and the integrity of the legal proceedings. Armed police officers stood at every entrance, while plainclothes security personnel mingled with the crowd of legal observers, journalists, and constitutional experts who had managed to secure seats in the packed courtroom. The magistrate, Dame Margaret Thornbury, had 30 years of judicial experience, but she knew that this case would define her career and potentially influence the British legal system for generations to come. King William spent the morning in his private study, watching the news coverage with a heavy heart, as commentators debated the implications of his decision to allow the prosecution to proceed. The personal cost of upholding constitutional principle had become painfully clear as he witnessed the international scrutiny and criticism directed at the royal family. His private secretary had compiled a thick folder of international press coverage, most of it critical of both the monarchy and the circumstances that had led to this unprecedented crisis. When Camilla entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the assembled crowd as they witnessed history in the making. Dressed in a simple black suit rather than her usual royal attire, she appeared smaller and more vulnerable than the public had ever seen her. The absence of royal regalia seemed to emphasize her transformation from queen consort to criminal defendant, a fall from grace that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. Her lawyer, Sir Marcus, stood beside her with the weight of constitutional history on his shoulders. Dame Thornbury addressed the court with the gravity appropriate for such an unprecedented proceeding, acknowledging the unique circumstances while emphasizing that the law must be applied equally to all citizens, regardless of their status or position. Her words carried the authority of centuries of British jurisprudence, even as she navigated legal territory that no judge had ever before been required to traverse. The formal reading of charges against a queen consort marked a moment that constitutional scholars would study for decades. The legal arguments presented by both sides reflected the extraordinary nature of the case, with the prosecution emphasizing that royal status could not excuse criminal behavior, while the defense sought to contextualize Camilla's actions within the framework of family dispute, rather than treasonous assault. Every word spoken in that courtroom was recorded and analyzed by legal experts, as the proceedings established precedents that would influence how the law applied to royal family members in the future. As testimony unfolded, the personal dynamics that had led to this crisis became public knowledge for the first time. Palace staff members speaking under oath described the growing tension between Camilla and King William in the months preceding the incident. Their carefully worded testimonies painted a picture of a royal household under unprecedented stress, struggling to balance traditional protocols with the demands of modern governance and family relationships. The international implications of the trial became increasingly apparent as foreign governments began reviewing their diplomatic relationships with the United Kingdom. Commonwealth nations in particular faced difficult questions about their continued recognition of the British monarchy, while Republican movements seized upon the scandal as evidence of royal obsolescence. The stability of the British constitutional system, taken for granted for centuries, suddenly appeared fragile and uncertain. Public opinion remained deeply divided, with polls showing the nation split almost evenly between those who supported Camilla's prosecution and those who believed the matter should have been handled privately within the royal family. The debate raged in pubs, offices, and social media platforms across the country, as ordinary citizens grappled with questions about justice, privilege, and the role of monarchy in democratic society. When Dame Thornbury delivered her verdict, the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Her decision to find Camilla guilty of assault while recommending a suspended sentence reflected the unique constitutional challenges of the case. The judgment acknowledged the seriousness of attacking the sovereign, while recognizing the unprecedented circumstances and the defendant's previous service to the crown. The compromise satisfied few but preserved both legal principle and royal dignity to the extent possible under such extraordinary circumstances. The aftermath of the trial would reshape the British monarchy in ways that neither William nor Camilla could have anticipated when their argument began in the blue drawing room. Camilla's resignation from all royal duties was swift and final, marking the end of a chapter in royal history that had begun with such promise decades earlier. King William, aged by the crisis but strengthened in his resolve to modernize the monarchy, began the long process of rebuilding public trust and redefining royal authority for a new generation. As the crowds dispersed from Westminster and the international media attention gradually shifted to other stories, the British people were left to contemplate the lessons of this unprecedented crisis. The monarchy had survived its greatest modern challenge, but not unchanged. The events that began with a family argument and ended with a queen consort's criminal conviction would be remembered as the moment when the ancient institution of British royalty was forced to confront the realities of justice and accountability in the modern world.